I'm Madison Foster, 28 years old. 6 months ago, at my grandfather's funeral, I watched my sister inherit millions while I got a single plane ticket to Rome. Everyone in that room laughed at me. But those 6 words a stranger said when I landed changed everything. Before I share what happened in that Italian law office, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this story. I love hearing from viewers around the world, so drop a comment with your location and what time you're watching this. Last week, someone from Tokyo watched at 3 a.m. and another from London during their lunch break. Now let me take you back to that funeral. Picture this: a grand Manhattan cathedral filled with New York's business elite, all gathered to honor William Foster, my grandfather, a man who built an empire worth hundreds of millions. My sister Sophie sat in the front row, already calculating her inheritance. My parents whispered about stock transfers. And me? I sat in the back, the family disappointment who chose art over profit margins. What none of us knew was that Grandpa had been planning this moment for years. Growing up in the Foster family meant one thing: business came first. My father Richard built shopping centers across the East Coast. My mother Patricia managed the finances with surgical precision. And Sophie? She was their golden child, Wharton MBA at 24, running a division of the family company by 26. Then there was me, the one who studied art history at Columbia, the one who spent summers in museums instead of boardrooms. Madison's still finding herself, Mom would tell her friends, that tight smile never reaching her eyes. We can't all be Sophie. Every family dinner followed the same script. Sophie would discuss quarterly projections while Dad nodded approvingly. Mom would mention another promotion, another acquisition. When they finally turned to me, the questions came wrapped in disappointment. Still writing those little art reviews? Met anyone successful yet? When will you do something substantial? But here's what they never noticed. While they talked numbers, I was the one sitting with Grandpa after dinner. While they rushed off to conference calls, I listened to his stories about traveling through Europe in his 20s. He'd describe paintings in Rome with such passion, his eyes would light up like a young man's again. They see the price of everything, he once told me, watching my family through his study window, but the value of nothing. I thought he meant it philosophically. I had no idea he'd been building something in secret for 40 years. Something that would only reveal itself after his death. Something he'd hidden from everyone. Except the one person he knew would understand. That person, apparently, was me. The morning of Grandpa's funeral, I arrived early to help with arrangements. Sophie was already there, directing the funeral home staff like a CEO at a board meeting. "Madison," she said without looking up from her phone. "The distant relatives need someone to seat them. Can you handle that?" Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "This must be hard." Just another task deemed suitable for the family underachiever. The seating chart told the whole story. Front row, Sophie, my parents, and Grandpa's business partners. Second row, key investors and company executives. I was placed in row 6, behind Great-Aunt Mildred, who hadn't spoken to anyone since 2015, and Cousin Jeffrey, who only showed up for the will reading. When it came time for eulogies, Dad spoke about Grandpa's business legacy. Sophie delivered a PowerPoint-worthy speech about carrying forward his entrepreneurial vision. 7 family members shared memories. Nobody asked me to speak. "Madison wouldn't know what to say anyway," I heard Mom whisper to her sister. "She barely understood what William did for a living." I understood perfectly. I just saw something else too. The man who secretly flew to Venice every year, who had a favorite bench at the Met, who could spend hours discussing a single brush stroke. But that man, apparently, wasn't worth eulogizing. As I sat there, ignored and invisible, I noticed someone I didn't recognize. A distinguished older man in an expensive Italian suit, sitting alone in the back corner. He wasn't crying or praying. He was watching. Specifically, he was watching me. When our eyes met, he nodded slightly, then wrote something in a leather notebook. I wouldn't learn his name until Rome. Lorenzo Benedetti, the keeper of Grandpa's real secret. After the burial, we gathered in Grandpa's Manhattan penthouse for the will reading, the same penthouse Sophie had been eyeing for years. Imagine the parties I could throw here, she'd said at last year's Christmas dinner, right in front of him. Harold Morrison, the family lawyer for 30 years, cleared his throat. The room fell silent. 20 relatives all leaning forward like vultures around a carcass. To my son Richard, Harold read, I leave my shares in Foster Development Corporation and the properties in Connecticut. Dad nodded, unsurprised. To my daughter-in-law Patricia, the investment portfolio and the house in the Hamptons. Mom actually smiled. To my granddaughter Sophie Foster. Harold paused for effect, and Sophie sat straighter. I leave the Manhattan penthouse, the yacht Sterling Dream, and controlling interest in Foster International, valued at $27 million. The room erupted in congratulations. Sophie was already on her phone, probably texting her boyfriend about their new yacht. Mom squeezed her shoulder proudly. Dad actually applauded. Then Harold looked at me. The room grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes before a punchline. Madison, Harold said, his expression unreadable. Your grandfather left specific instructions regarding your inheritance. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophie was already smirking. Harold reached into his briefcase, but instead of pulling out documents, he handed something to my father. Richard, William requested you give this to Madison personally. My father stood, walked over to me, and held out a crumpled, yellowed envelope. It looked like it had been stuffed in a pocket and forgotten. The room held its breath, waiting. Then he paused and looked at me. The envelope felt weightless in my hands. 20 pairs of eyes watched as I opened it, some genuinely curious, others barely containing their amusement. Sophie had her phone out, recording. Inside was a single item, an airline ticket, one way to Rome. Business class, I noticed, not economy, though that detail seemed lost on everyone else. The laughter started with Cousin Jeffrey. He bought her a vacation! Then Sophie joined in. Oh my God, he literally gave you an escape route from your failed life. Mom's comment cut the deepest. Well, at least it's something. Maybe you'll find inspiration for your little art blogs. The ticket was dated for 3 days from now. No return flight, no hotel information, just Rome. That's it? Aunt Mildred wheezed from her corner. Nothing else? Harold shuffled his papers. That concludes the distribution of assets. Dad tried to look sympathetic but couldn't hide his relief. Madison, honey, Grandpa probably wanted you to have one last adventure. You know how he loved Italy. One last adventure, Sophie repeated, shaking her head, while I handle his actual legacy. I stared at the ticket. Alitalia Flight 621. Departure, JFK. Arrival, Leonardo da Vinci Fiumicino. In the corner, barely visible, was handwriting I recognized as Grandpa's. Trust the journey. Well, Sophie announced, already moving toward the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, I should probably start planning the renovation. This place needs a complete update. The room shifted its attention to her, to the real inheritor. I slipped the ticket back into the envelope, my fingers brushing against something else. A tiny piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. But I wouldn't look at it until later. For now, I just sat there, the forgotten granddaughter with her one-way ticket to nowhere. Wait, everyone gather around, Sophie called out, champagne glass already in hand. This is too perfect not to document. The family inheritance day. She positioned everyone for a photo, her in the center with the penthouse keys, my parents flanking her with their documents, cousins holding up their checks. Then she looked at me. Madison, come on, hold up your ticket. I'd rather not. Don't be shy now, Mom interrupted. You're part of this family too. Someone, I think it was Jeffrey, started chanting, show the ticket, show the ticket. Others joined in, laughing. I held it up. Closer to Sophie, the photographer instructed. So we can see the contrast. I mean, so everyone's in frame. Sophie draped her arm around me, keys jangling. At least Grandpa finally gave you a reason to leave, she whispered, loud enough for others to hear. You've been drifting for years. Maybe she'll find herself in Rome, Dad added, trying to sound supportive but achieving the opposite. Or a rich Italian husband, Aunt Mildred cackled. Mom raised her glass. To William Foster, who knew exactly what each of us needed. Everyone toasted. Sophie's boyfriend posted the photo immediately. Inheritance Day. Sophie got millions, Madison got a plane ticket, had family legacy, had boss babe. Within minutes, it had dozens of likes and comments. Old classmates, family friends, everyone seeing my humiliation in real time. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I finally looked at that tiny piece of paper tucked behind the ticket. It was an address in Rome, written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, nothing else. When I returned, Sophie was giving tours of her penthouse. Nobody noticed I'd left. Nobody noticed I'd come back. Story of my life, really. I could have fought back. Could have reminded them that I was the only one who visited Grandpa during his chemo treatments. Could have mentioned the nights I spent reading to him when the pain kept him awake. But what would be the point? They'd already written their story. Sophie the success, Madison the failure. Instead, I stood by the window, looking out at Central Park while the celebration continued behind me. That's when I remembered something Grandpa told me during his last hospital stay. Value isn't always visible, Madison. The most precious things often come disguised as nothing special. At the time, I thought he was comforting me about my career. Now, holding this plane ticket, I wondered if he meant something else entirely. You okay? It was Harold, the lawyer, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of water. Fine, I said automatically. He studied me for a moment. Your grandfather was a complex man. He had many interests that he kept private. Before I could ask what he meant, Sophie called him over to discuss tax implications. He squeezed my shoulder gently before walking away. I made my decision then. No tears, no scenes, no begging for recognition. I would take that flight to Rome. If nothing else, it would be 3 days away from this. The party continued for hours. Sophie signed papers with a flourish. Mom photographed every document. Dad gave impromptu speeches about carrying on the Foster legacy. I left without saying goodbye. Only the catering staff noticed. 3 days later, I stood at JFK with a single suitcase, holding that crumpled ticket. The gate agent smiled. Rome? How wonderful. Business or pleasure? I honestly don't know, I replied. I was about to find out. If you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued by your family, type worth in the comments. I read every single one and your stories inspire me. Just yesterday, someone shared how they were the only sibling not invited to their father's company, until he left them something everyone else overlooked. These stories matter because they remind us we're not alone in feeling invisible sometimes, and if you're wondering what was waiting for me in Rome, trust me, none of us saw it coming. Not Sophie with her millions, not my parents with their portfolios, and definitely not me with my crumpled plane ticket. The business class seat felt like a sign. If Grandpa wanted to humiliate me, wouldn't economy have driven the point home better? I settled in, and that's when I noticed the ticket's purchase date. 6 months ago. Long before Grandpa's diagnosis turned terminal. He'd been planning this while he was still healthy, while Sophie was presenting her business proposals. While my parents were discussing succession plans, he'd been quietly booking a flight for me to Rome. During the flight, I pulled out my passport to fill out the landing card. That tiny piece of paper with the Rome address fell out, along with something else I hadn't seen, a business card tucked into the passport's back page. Lorenzo Benedetti, estate attorney, Via dei Coronari, 45, the same address as on the paper. I turned the card over. On the back, in different handwriting, Miss Foster, I will be expecting you, L.B. My hands started shaking. This wasn't some spontaneous gift or afterthought. This was orchestrated. The flight attendant offered me champagne. Celebrating something? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. She smiled knowingly. Rome has a way of revealing surprises. First time? Yes. Business or pleasure? I looked at the business card again. I think I'm about to find out. As we descended into Rome, I pressed my face to the window. The city sprawled below, ancient and eternal. Somewhere down there, a stranger named Lorenzo Benedetti was waiting for me. Somewhere down there was the answer to why my grandfather, who'd given Sophie $27 million, had given me a plane ticket. The captain announced our landing. Welcome to Rome, where history has a way of coming alive. He had no idea how right he was. I expected to take a taxi. Instead, as I exited customs, a man in a perfectly pressed suit held a sign with my name, not Foster. Specifically, Miss Madison Foster. Miss Foster? His English was accented but precise. I am Marco. Mr. Benedetti sent me. He sent a car? He sent the car, Marco corrected, leading me through the terminal. Outside waited a vintage Bentley, polished to mirror perfection. Other travelers stared as Marco held the door open. This wasn't a taxi. This wasn't even a regular luxury car service. This was something else entirely. How did you know which flight? I asked as we pulled away. Mr. Benedetti has been tracking this flight for 6 months, Marco replied. Your grandfather was very specific about the arrangements. We drove through Rome's chaotic traffic, but I barely noticed the honking or the scooters weaving between cars. I was processing Marco's words. 6 months of tracking, arrangements plural. Did you know my grandfather? Marco met my eyes in the rearview mirror. Mr. William was a frequent visitor, always stayed at the same hotel, always visited the same places. What places? You'll see soon enough, Miss Foster. We turned onto Via dei Coronari, a narrow street lined with antique shops and art galleries. The Bentley stopped before a 16th-century building, its facade weathered but dignified. Top floor, Marco said, opening my door. Mr. Benedetti is waiting. I climbed the marble stairs, my footsteps echoing. Each floor I passed seemed frozen in time. Renaissance frescoes, Baroque doorframes, history layered upon history. At the top, massive wooden doors stood open. A man emerged, the same one from the funeral, in the Italian suit. Miss Foster, he said, extending his hand. We've been expecting you for quite some time. Lorenzo Benedetti's office looked like a Renaissance painting come to life. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, oil paintings in gilded frames, and windows overlooking Rome's terracotta rooftops. But what caught my attention was the photograph on his desk. My grandfather, much younger, standing beside Lorenzo in front of the Colosseum. Please, sit, Lorenzo gestured to a leather chair. We have much to discuss. You were at the funeral. I've been at many of your grandfather's important moments, though always discreetly. He poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter. I've been his European attorney for 40 years. I didn't know he had European attorneys. There's a great deal you didn't know about William Foster. Lorenzo opened a mahogany filing cabinet, pulling out folders thick with documents. Your grandfather lived 2 lives, Miss Foster. The one your family saw. The real estate mogul, the businessman, the builder of shopping centers. And the other? Lorenzo smiled, the kind of smile that precedes a revelation. The one he shared with no one. Until now. He spread photographs across the desk, Grandpa at art auctions, Grandpa with famous painters, Grandpa in galleries I recognized from my art history textbooks. This can't be real. Your grandfather was one of the most significant private art collectors in the world, but he kept it completely separate from his American life. He said his family wouldn't understand. So why am I here? Lorenzo leaned back, studying me. Because you're the only one who would. He told me about your museum visits together, your conversations about art, how you saw what others missed. But the inheritance, Sophie got everything. Sophie got what they could see. Lorenzo stood. What I'm about to show you, only you were meant to see. Lorenzo led me through his office to what looked like a wall of books. He pulled a specific volume, Vasari's Lives of the Artists, and the entire bookshelf swung inward. The room beyond stole my breath. Paintings covered every wall, salon style. I recognized styles immediately. That had to be a Caravaggio, that looked like a genuine Monet. And was that actually a Basquiat? Sculptures stood on pedestals, drawings filled flat files. It was like stepping into a private wing of the Met. "This is just the Rome storage," Lorenzo said casually. "Just the—" I couldn't finish. In the center of the room sat a desk covered in journals. I opened one at random. Grandpa's handwriting filled the pages, notes about acquisitions, sketches of paintings, philosophical musings about art and beauty, dated 1985, another from 1997, dozens of volumes spanning 40 years. "He wrote about you," Lorenzo said, pulling out a recent journal. "Here." I read Grandpa's words. "Madison understands that art isn't about price tags. She sees the soul in it, the story. Sophie sees assets, Richard sees investments, but Madison, she sees what I see, the heartbeat." Tears blurred my vision. Every piece here, Lorenzo gestured around the room, was chosen because it spoke to his soul, not his wallet. Though, ironically, following his heart made him far wealthier than his real estate ever did. On the wall, I noticed a painting I'd written about in my little art blog. A piece by an unknown artist that I'd championed. Grandpa had bought it. He'd been reading my work. "This is overwhelming." "This is just the beginning," Lorenzo said. "There are 11 more locations: Paris, Venice, London, Tokyo, New York. Yes, he had a space there your family never knew about." "Why hide all this?" Lorenzo's expression grew serious. "That's when things get complicated." Lorenzo returned to his desk and pulled out a leather-bound folder marked with my name. "Your grandfather established a trust in 1985. The Foster Art Foundation, registered in Switzerland, managed through Rome." He opened the folder. The number at the top of the page didn't make sense. 150 million euros, Lorenzo confirmed. Approximately $170 million at today's rate. I sank into the chair. That's impossible. A Modigliani purchased for $50,000 in 1983 is now worth $40 million. A Basquiat bought for $8,000 is valued at $22 million. Your grandfather had an eye, but more importantly, he had patience. Why didn't he tell anyone? He tried once. Showed your father a small piece he'd acquired. Richard's response was, "How much can we sell it for?" That's when William decided to keep this world separate. Lorenzo pulled out more documents. 12 galleries across the world, all profitable, all displaying parts of the collection, 6 restoration facilities, a scholarship program that's put 300 students through art school, all under the foundation's umbrella. "And this is mine?" "With conditions." Lorenzo's tone shifted. "Your grandfather wanted to ensure this legacy went to someone who understood its true value, not its market price." I thought about Sophie's $27 million. It seemed almost quaint now. "The company in America was his obligation," Lorenzo explained. "What his father built, what was expected. But this was his passion, his true life's work. So the plane ticket was your invitation to inherit what really mattered to him. But there's something else. A specific condition that involves your family." My stomach tightened. "What kind of condition?" Lorenzo pulled out another document. "You'll need to present this at a family meeting. Your grandfather wanted the truth revealed properly." "Your grandfather's will has 2 parts," Lorenzo explained. "The first, which your family received, was straightforward. The second requires you to reveal the foundation's existence to them within 30 days of your arrival in Rome." "He wants me to tell them?" "He wants you to show them. There's a very specific reason." Lorenzo pulled out a legal document. "Sophie's inheritance, the $27 million company, has a hidden clause. It requires maintaining a cultural and artistic division to keep certain tax benefits and international partnerships. I read through the legalese. Without an art division, she loses the European contracts, worth approximately 40% of the company's value. Your grandfather structured it this way 20 years ago, knowing this day would come. So he planned for me to offer them a choice. You can provide the art division through the foundation, making both inheritances more valuable. Or they can forfeit the contracts and operate solely domestically. It was brilliant. Grandpa had connected our inheritances in a way that forced cooperation. But there's more, Lorenzo continued. You must present this in front of the full family and the board of directors. No private deals. Complete transparency. When? There's a family business meeting scheduled for next week. I've already booked my flight. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Rome's ancient streets. He wanted me to show them that worth isn't measured in profit margins. Exactly. But more importantly, he wanted to ensure his real legacy, the foundation, would be protected and valued. You're not just inheriting wealth, Madison. You're inheriting a responsibility. What if they refuse? What if they'd rather lose the contracts than work with me? Lorenzo smiled. Then you'll know exactly what they value most, and you'll proceed accordingly. I flew back to New York 3 days later, my head spinning with everything I'd learned. The Madison who left with a crumpled ticket wasn't the same one who returned with a leather portfolio of documents. How was your little vacation? Mom asked when I walked into the family office for our weekly meeting. She didn't look up from her spreadsheet. Educational, I replied. Sophie was holding court at the conference table, discussing her plans for the company. We're pivoting to purely commercial development. Art installations and cultural spaces are just money pits. The irony was almost painful. Did you see the Colosseum? Dad asked, trying to be polite. Among other things. Sophie rolled her eyes. Well, while you were sightseeing, I've been restructuring Grandpa's entire business model, cutting the fat, maximizing profits. That's wonderful, I said evenly. She paused, surprised by my lack of reaction. The old Madison would have defended the value of cultural spaces. This Madison just smiled and took notes. You're being weird, Sophie said after the meeting. What happened in Rome? I did some thinking. About? About value. About what really matters. She laughed. Please don't tell me you're having some eat, pray, love moment. Something like that. For the next 3 days, I maintained perfect silence. I attended meetings, nodded at Sophie's plans, and said nothing about Lorenzo's impending arrival. I even helped Mom with filing, listening to her complain about the complicated European contracts that required some ridiculous art program. We'll find a loophole, she assured Sophie. We always do. Meanwhile, Lorenzo was already in the air, carrying documents that would change everything. The family meeting was tomorrow. They had no idea what was coming. The boardroom on the 40th floor was packed. 23 people, family members, board directors, key investors. Sophie had called it a pivotal meeting for Foster International's future. She wasn't wrong, just not in the way she thought. Before we begin, Sophie announced, standing at the head of the table, I want to thank everyone for supporting this transition. Grandpa built something amazing, but it's time to modernize. I sat in my usual spot, far corner, barely visible. The seat they'd assigned me years ago, and never bothered to change. Sophie launched into her presentation. Profit projections, cost-cutting measures, the elimination of vanity projects. Mom and Dad beamed with pride. The board members nodded approvingly. We'll be terminating all cultural partnerships by year end, Sophie explained. That alone will save us $2 million annually. What about the European contracts? Asked Robert Chen, one of the board members. Don't they require cultural initiatives? Sophie waved dismissively. Our lawyers are working on it. Worst case, we restructure as a purely domestic company. The real money is here anyway. That's when the boardroom door opened. My apologies for being late, a familiar voice said. Lorenzo walked in, immaculate in his Italian suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Sophie froze mid-sentence. I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Indeed it is, Lorenzo agreed, walking toward the table. Which is why I'm here. Lorenzo Benedetti, European Counsel for the Foster Estate. Dad stood up. There must be some mistake. Harold Morrison handles all estate matters. Harold handles the American estate, Lorenzo corrected. I handle everything else. The room went silent. Sophie slowly sat down. Everything else? Mom's voice was sharp. What else is there? Lorenzo looked directly at me, then back at the room. Perhaps Miss Madison should explain. Every head in the room turned to me. For the first time in my life, I had the Foster family's complete attention. Hello, Lorenzo, I said calmly, standing up. Thank you for coming. You know him? Sophie's voice pitched higher. How do you know him? Lorenzo placed his briefcase on the table. Miss Madison and I met in Rome, at your grandfather's request. That's impossible, Dad interjected. Madison just went there on a vacation. Not quite, I said, moving toward the center of the room. Grandpa sent me to Rome to meet Lorenzo, to learn about something he'd been building for 40 years. Sophie laughed, but it sounded forced. What could Grandpa possibly have been building that we didn't know about? Lorenzo opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. The Foster Art Foundation, established 1985. Current assets, 150 million euros, 12 international galleries, and one of the most significant private art collections in the world. The silence was deafening. Mom was the first to speak. This is a joke. I assure you, Mrs. Foster, it's quite real. Lorenzo began distributing documents. Audited financials, gallery deeds, insurance valuations, all properly registered and documented. Robert Chen whistled low. These numbers. This is bigger than Foster International. Sophie snatched a document, scanning it frantically. This can't be legal. We would have known. The lawyers would have found it. Your grandfather maintained complete separation between his businesses, Lorenzo explained. Different lawyers, different countries, different structures. All perfectly legal. Dad looked at me, his face pale. And you? You inherited this? Before I could answer, Lorenzo pulled out one more document. There's one more matter. The inheritance you received was only part one. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew turned upside down? That's exactly what happened next in that boardroom. If this story resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't always immediately visible. I've received hundreds of messages from viewers who were underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, until they proved everyone wrong. Your stories give me strength. Now let me tell you what Lorenzo revealed that left my entire family speechless, and why Sophie's $27 million inheritance suddenly depended entirely on me. Lorenzo pulled out an official document, embossed with multiple legal seals. This is William Foster's complete will, filed in Switzerland and recognized internationally. We already had the will reading, Sophie protested. You had part one, Lorenzo corrected. This is part two. May I? The board members nodded, fascinated. Sophie looked like she might be sick. Lorenzo began reading. To my granddaughter Madison Rose Foster, who saw beauty where others saw profit, who understood value beyond price tags, who spent hours listening to an old man's stories when everyone else was too busy counting money, I leave the Foster Art Foundation in its entirety. He continued. This includes all assets, galleries, collections, and the sum of 150 million euros to be managed as she sees fit, with the hope that she will continue to prove that true worth cannot be measured in quarterly reports. This is fraud! Sophie stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Madison doesn't know anything about running a foundation. Lorenzo pulled out another paper. Your grandfather anticipated this reaction. He left a video message to be played at this moment. He connected his laptop to the boardroom screen. Grandpa's face appeared, recorded just weeks before his death. If you're watching this, Grandpa said, his voice still strong, Then Madison has discovered what I've spent 40 years building. And Sophie, Richard, Patricia, you've discovered that the fortune you thought you knew was only half the story. Mom gripped Dad's arm. Sophie sat down slowly. I built 2 empires, Grandpa continued. One of concrete and profit that you all understood, and one of beauty and soul that only Madison could see. She was the only one who ever asked me about my dreams, not my deals. This can't be legal. Dad slammed his hand on the table. We're calling our lawyers immediately. Please do, Lorenzo said calmly. You'll find everything is perfectly legitimate. 40 years of meticulous documentation. Sophie was scrolling through her phone frantically. I'm finding nothing about a Foster Art Foundation online. By design, I said quietly. Grandpa kept it completely private. He didn't want the Foster name associated with it until now. You knew about this? Mom's voice was ice. You knew in Rome and said nothing? I was instructed to wait for this meeting. Robert Chen was studying the financials. This is remarkable, the appreciation on these art pieces, the gallery revenues. This is a masterclass in alternative investment. Investment? I turned to him. Mr. Chen, with all due respect, this isn't about investment. It's about preservation, education, and sharing beauty with the world. Sophie laughed bitterly. Listen to you. 1 week ago, you were nobody. Now you're lecturing us about art? 1 week ago, you thought I was nobody, I corrected. There's a difference. The other board members were whispering among themselves. Several were Googling the galleries mentioned in the documents, their eyes widening at what they found. The Benedetti Gallery in Rome, one muttered. The Foster Foundation Gallery in Paris. These are real. These are prestigious venues. This changes everything, another board member said. Foster International's European contracts. Can we discuss that privately? Sophie interrupted desperately. Actually, Lorenzo interjected, we can't. There's more to the will that directly affects Foster International. Dad's face went from red to white. What do you mean, affects Foster International? Lorenzo smiled slightly. Perhaps we should continue with the video. Grandpa's face filled the screen again. He looked tired but determined, his eyes sharp with purpose. Sophie, you're probably calculating how to challenge this will. Richard, you're thinking about lawyers. Patricia, you're wondering how you missed this. Stop. Listen. For once in your lives, just listen. The room was utterly still. I built Foster International because it was expected. My father's legacy, his father's before him. But every trip to Europe, every business meeting in Rome or Paris, I was building something else. Something that fed my soul instead of just my bank account. He paused, coughing slightly, then continued. Madison, do you remember when you were 14? You dragged me to that small gallery in Soho. You stood in front of a painting for 20 minutes, explaining why the artist's use of light reminded you of hope. That's when I knew. You saw what I saw, what the others never could. Tears ran down my face. Sophie stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. I watched Sophie present her business plans, watched Richard count his profits, watched Patricia optimize every penny. But Madison was the only one who ever asked me, Grandpa, what makes you happy? She was the only one who saw me, not my money. The video shifted to show images of the galleries, the collections, the scholarship recipients. This is my real legacy. 300 students through art school. Thousands of people experiencing beauty they couldn't afford otherwise. Museums enriched by donations. This is what I want to be remembered for. Grandpa looked directly at the camera. Madison was the only one who understood that worth isn't measured in profit margins, so I'm giving her the power to prove it. The screen went black. Lorenzo cleared his throat in the silence. There's a final component to the will that directly impacts Foster International. Sophie's hands were shaking. What component? Your inheritance, Miss Sophie, comes with conditions you weren't informed about. Foster International's European contracts, worth approximately 40% of the company's value, require maintaining an active cultural and artistic division. We know that. Our lawyers are handling it. Your lawyers can't handle it, Lorenzo said firmly. Because your grandfather structured those contracts himself, 20 years ago. They're ironclad. Without a legitimate art program, you lose European operations entirely. Dad stood up. That's 40 million in annual revenue. 43 million to be precise, Lorenzo confirmed. However, there's a solution. The Foster Art Foundation can serve as your cultural division, if Madison agrees. Every eye turned to me. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. You're saying my inheritance depends on Madison? I'm saying both inheritances can work together, making each more valuable. Or separately, making yours significantly less so. Robert Chen leaned forward. This is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He connected them in a way that requires cooperation. Madison, Mom's tone had completely changed. Surely we can discuss this as a family. We are discussing it, I said calmly. Right here, in front of everyone, just as Grandpa wanted. Sophie looked desperate. What do you want? Money? Recognition? A position in the company? I want what I've always wanted, respect. Not for my inheritance, but for who I am, for what I contribute, for seeing value where you see waste. We respect you, Dad said quickly. No, I said simply. You don't, but you're about to learn how. I stood and walked to the head of the table, where Sophie had been standing. She moved aside without protest, a first in our entire lives. I won't take anything from you, I began, looking at each family member. Your inheritances remain yours, but respect is non-negotiable going forward. Of course, Dad said quickly. Whatever you need. I need you to listen. Really listen. I pulled out my own folder. The Foster Art Foundation will partner with Foster International, fulfilling your European requirements. But it's a partnership, not a subsidiary. Equal standing, equal respect. Equal? Sophie's voice cracked. Yes, your board meetings will include cultural impact assessments. Your developments will incorporate genuine artistic elements, not token installations. And I'll have veto power over any decisions affecting the Foundation's involvement. The board members were nodding. This was business they understood. In return, I continued, Foster International gains access to 12 prestigious galleries for events, a network of cultural contacts across Europe and Asia, and the credibility that comes from supporting the arts. Your European contracts remain intact, possibly even expand. Robert Chen was already calculating. This could actually increase our valuations. Cultural responsibility is huge in European markets. Madison, Sophie said quietly, I need this to work. I know. I met her eyes. And I'm not going to destroy what you've built out of spite. But things change starting now. No more little art blogs comments. No more seating me in the corner. No more treating my perspective as less valuable than yours. I pulled out a partnership agreement Lorenzo and I had drafted. This formalizes everything. Sign it, and we move forward together. Refuse, and you restructure as a domestic-only company. Sophie reached for the pen. Sophie signed first, then Dad, then Mom. Their signatures looked shaky, uncertain, a stark contrast to the confident strokes they usually used on million-dollar deals. There's one more thing, I said, as Lorenzo notarized the documents. Sophie, you're going to take an art appreciation course, a real one, not some weekend seminar. You're going to learn why what we do matters. You're joking. It's in the agreement, page 12. She flipped through, her face paling. 6 months of courses? Taught by professors from the Foundation's scholarship program, students you'll be indirectly supporting. The board members were trying not to smile. Several were openly impressed. This is humiliating, Sophie muttered. No, I said gently. This is education. The same education Grandpa wished you'd been open to years ago. Mom spoke up. What about us? Are there requirements for us too? Just one. Monthly family dinners at the gallery. Not to discuss business or profits, but to actually experience the art. To talk about something other than money for once. We can do that, Dad said, relief evident in his voice. We can definitely do that. Lorenzo gathered the signed documents. Congratulations, you've just created one of the most unique corporate cultural partnerships in the world. Your grandfather would be proud. Proud of Madison, maybe, Sophie said, but there was something different in her voice. Not bitterness, maybe curiosity? Proud of both of you, I corrected. You for building the business, me for preserving the soul. That's what he wanted, both sides working together. Robert Chen started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Even Sophie managed a small smile. So, she said quietly, when do I start these art classes? Monday, I replied. And Sophie? You might actually enjoy them. The next few weeks felt like living in an alternate universe. Mom called asking for my opinion on incorporating art installations in their new development. Dad forwarded articles about cultural investment trends, adding, "Thought you might find this interesting." They were trying, awkwardly but genuinely. Sophie's transformation was the most dramatic. After her first art history class, she texted me, "Did you know Monet painted the same haystacks 25 times to capture different light? That's basically A/B testing for beauty." I laughed. She was understanding art through a business lens, but at least she was understanding. The media caught wind of the story. The Foster fortune's hidden half ran in the Wall Street Journal. When Grandpa's real legacy was love not money appeared in the Times. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hear about my artistic vision. The same relatives who'd laughed at my plane ticket now called asking about gallery openings. Cousin Jeffrey, who'd started the mockery at the funeral, sent a LinkedIn request with a message. "Always knew you were special, Madison." I ignored most of them, but I did accept Sophie's invitation to lunch. "I owe you an apology," she said, stirring her coffee nervously. "Not just for the funeral, but for everything. Years of everything. You don't owe me." "I do. I measured everyone by their ROI, including my own sister. Grandpa saw something I completely missed." "He saw both of us," I reminded her, "just differently." "The company's European clients are thrilled about the partnership," she admitted. "We've actually gained 2 new contracts because of the cultural initiative. So we both won." "You won more," she said, then smiled. "But I'm learning that's okay. Not everything is a competition." It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. 6 months later, we opened the William Foster Memorial Gallery in Manhattan. The building sat between Sophie's corporate headquarters and my favorite museum, literally bridging both worlds. Opening night drew 500 guests. Art collectors mingled with corporate executives. Students from our scholarship program discussed technique with million-dollar donors. It was exactly what Grandpa had envisioned. Sophie stood beside me at the entrance, greeting guests. She could now discuss the Impressionist pieces with genuine understanding, even passion. When someone asked about a Rothko, she explained the emotional depth instead of the market value. "Madison," a familiar voice called. Lorenzo had flown in from Rome, bringing several European collectors. "The Times wants a photo of the Foster sisters," a photographer interrupted. "By the centerpiece." The centerpiece was the painting I'd written about in my little art blog, the one by an unknown artist that Grandpa had secretly purchased. Now it was valued at $2 million, but that wasn't why we displayed it. "This piece," I told the gathered crowd during my speech, "represents what my grandfather believed. That value isn't always visible at first glance. Sometimes the most precious things come disguised as nothing special." I caught Sophie wiping her eyes. Every piece in this gallery was chosen because it spoke to someone's soul. Not their wallet, their soul. That's the Foster legacy we're building forward. The applause was thunderous. But the moment that mattered most came later, when a young art student on scholarship approached me. "Miss Foster, I wanted to thank you. Without this program, I'd never have been able to study art." Thank my grandfather, I said. He believed in investing in dreams. Your grandfather, she said, but also you, for making sure his dream didn't die with him. A year after the funeral, I was organizing Grandpa's journals in the Rome office when I found a letter addressed to me, dated just days before his death. My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then my plan worked. You're probably sitting in Lorenzo's office, surrounded by the art that gave my life meaning, finally understanding why I kept it all secret. I didn't hide this from your family out of spite. I hid it because I knew they wouldn't understand. Not yet. They needed to lose something to gain perspective. They needed to see you rise to understand what they'd been missing. Your father measures success in square footage, your mother in profit margins, Sophie in market dominance. But you, my dear, you measure it in moments of beauty, in stories told through brushstrokes, in the way art makes people feel. That's the rarest gift of all. The money, the galleries, the collections, they're just tools. The real inheritance I'm leaving you is the permission to be yourself, fully and unapologetically, to prove that your way of seeing the world has value beyond measure. I watched you shrink yourself at family dinners, apologize for your passions, accept the back seat they assigned you. No more. Stand tall, take your place, not the place they give you, but the one you deserve. True inheritance isn't what you leave behind, it's what you inspire. Inspire them, Madison. Show them that there's more to life than numbers on a spreadsheet. Teach them what you taught me, that beauty matters, that art feeds souls, that some things are too precious to price. All my love, Grandpa P.S. The plane ticket wasn't just to Rome, it was to yourself. A year later, our foundation had helped launch 50 new artists, funded 20 museum exhibitions, and put 60 students through art school. The numbers Sophie loved to quote, though now she always added, but more importantly, we've enriched thousands of lives. The family dynamics had completely shifted. At our monthly gallery dinners, Dad would actually linger in front of paintings, asking questions about technique and meaning. Mom had started her own collection, small pieces from emerging artists she genuinely connected with. Remember when you got that plane ticket? Sophie said one evening, as we supervised the installation of a new exhibition. I thought Grandpa had lost his mind. You thought he was punishing me. I thought a lot of stupid things. She adjusted a spotlight, illuminating a sculpture perfectly. I've been thinking about Grandpa's two lives, the one we saw and the one he hid. Yeah? I don't want to live that way, splitting myself between who I am and who people expect me to be. What do you mean? She pulled out her phone, showing me an Instagram account. Sophie Learns Art. She'd been documenting her journey from skeptic to appreciator, and it had garnered 50,000 followers. People relate to the transformation, she explained, from someone who saw art as wasteful to someone who understands its necessity. The Foster Art Foundation had expanded to 15 galleries across 3 continents. We'd partnered with schools, hospitals, and community centers, bringing art to people who'd never have accessed it otherwise. But the biggest change was in me. I no longer sat in the back row. I no longer apologized for my perspective. I'd learned that sometimes the greatest inheritance is the courage to demand respect. The second anniversary of Grandpa's funeral arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Instead of gathering at his grave, the family met at the gallery, our new tradition. I have an announcement, Sophie said, surprising everyone. I'm establishing the Sophie Foster Fellowship for Business Students to study art, fully funded in partnership with Madison's Foundation. Sophie, that's wonderful, I said, genuinely moved. It's necessary, she corrected. Every business leader should understand what we almost lost, what we almost threw away because we couldn't see its value. Dad raised his wine glass. To William Foster, who taught us that legacy isn't just what you leave, it's what you teach others to see. To Grandpa, we all echoed. Later, as the family dispersed, Mom pulled me aside. I need to apologize, not just for the funeral, but for every time I made you feel less than, every comparison to Sophie. Every dismissive comment about your choices. Mom, let me finish. You were never the disappointment. We were. We disappointed ourselves by being too blind to see your worth. We all saw what we were trained to see, I said. You saw business. I saw beauty. Neither was wrong, just incomplete. Your grandfather saw everything, she said softly, and somehow knew you would too. The boundaries I'd established weren't walls, they were bridges. Respect wasn't demanded through power but earned through understanding. The family that had once laughed at my plane ticket now sought my perspective on things that actually mattered. You know what the real plot twist was? Sophie asked, as we locked up the gallery that night. What? Grandpa didn't give you his fortune. He gave you the power to teach us what fortune really means. She was right. And that was worth more than all the millions combined. So here I am, 2 years after that humiliating funeral, running a foundation worth more than my sister's company, partnering with the family that once dismissed me, and finally understanding what Grandpa meant by, value isn't always visible. Your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. Read that again. Your worth exists whether they acknowledge it or not. I spent years shrinking myself to fit in spaces that were never designed for me. Accepting the back row, apologizing for seeing beauty where others saw waste, believing their definition of success was the only one that mattered. But Grandpa saw me, the real me, and he made sure that one day they would have to see me too. Maybe you're the artist in a family of engineers, the dreamer among pragmatists, the one who measures success differently, the one seated at the back of every family photo. Your plane ticket is coming. It might not be literal, might not be Rome or millions in art, but somewhere, somehow, someone sees your true value. And one day, the very people who overlooked you will need exactly what you have to offer. Don't let them convince you that your way of seeing the world is wrong. Don't let them make you feel small for caring about things that can't be measured in spreadsheets. Don't accept the seat they assign you if it's not where you belong. Stand tall. Take up space. Trust that what makes you different makes you valuable. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property or companies. Sometimes it's the permission to be exactly who you are and the power to make others see your worth. Your worth has been there all along, even if it takes a plane ticket to Rome to reveal it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. What would you have done with that plane ticket? Would you have gone to Rome not knowing what waited? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next story about family, justice, and finding your true value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so genuinely successful that respect becomes inevitable.